How's it going, everybody? In this video, at the request of this comment, we're going to be making a simple GUI plugin. So as usual, I've created a basic plugin project, and I've just added our log when the plugin starts up and when it shuts down. So the very first thing we need to do when creating a GUI is have some way to open said GUI. So let's add a command to do that. I'm going to create right-click, new, and package. First thing, call it commands. And then we're going to go in here and create a new Kotlin class file and call it open GUI command. And remember, this has to extend command executor. It's like this. And because it extends command executor, it's going to need to implement this function, which is here. This on command function. Okay, so we can just return false to get rid of the errors. Now, the first thing we want to do with our command is we actually want to create the GUI. And the way GUIs work in Minecraft plugins is you create an inventory and you detect when the player clicks on different items, and that's how you do buttons. And if you want to have like custom buttons with custom icons, you can create a texture pack and use custom model data to have different textures for different buttons. But that's beyond the scope of this video. So here we're going to create an inventory. So we're going to do val inventory equals. And we don't need to give it a type because Kotlin will dynamically understand that this will be an inventory when we create the inventory. So we're going to do bucket dot create inventory. And we have to pass in an owner. Now we could just pass in a sender, but this isn't going to work. And the reason is because a sender, a command sender, could be a console, and the console cannot have an inventory. Before we do that, we just want to say if sender not is, the exclamation mark is, player. Which means if they're not a player, we're just going to return false, which means it'll just exit and we don't actually need that semicolon, which means it will just exit and not execute any more of the code. So now that we've confirmed that this sender is in fact a player, we can do sender as player. And now that we've confirmed that this sender is in fact a player, Kotlin will automatically understand that this can only be a player in this scenario, and it will dynamically cast it. Then the second argument it needs is a name. So for that, we're going to use a chat component. So we're going to go component, not that one. I want to make sure to use this one and not the java.awt one. Dot text, and let's just say GUI. Why not? We can do dot color and then text color dot color, and maybe we want to make it a greeny blue. So we can do 0 red, do 255 green, and we can do 75 blue, and that should give us a nice greeny blue. Okay, so we've put in our title, and I've actually forgotten a argument here. So let's just go back and put in another argument. And the argument I've forgotten is the size of the inventory. Now, it's very important to remember this. In Minecraft, the size of an inventory must be a multiple of 9. So you can have an inventory of 9, you can have an inventory of 18, you can have an inventory of 54, but you cannot have an inventory of like 37 or something, because that is not a multiple of 9. It's also important to remember that your inventory must be between the sizes of 9 and 54. Otherwise, you will get an error when trying to create the inventory. So for us, I'm just going to use an inventory size of 9, which is just one row, because that's all we need. So now that we've created our inventory, we could now add items to it, but we're going to do that after we've opened our inventory for the player. So we can do sender, which we know is a player because of this check up here, dot open inventory, and then we can just pass in our inventory. And just like that, our command should open an inventory for the player. So let's test that. But before we do, we have to register our command. We'll come back to here. We'll go into resources, plugin YML. Then we're going to go and say commands. Then we're going to say open GUI. I'm going to give it a description. This command opens the GUI. And if you don't know, GUI stands for graphical user interface. Now we have to register our command. So let's create a function. And this can be private. So we can do private fun register commands. And then let's do, I've forgotten this in Kotlin, you first letter of your function should have a lowercase letter, the first letter of the first word. Okay, and then we're going to do get command, and then our command name, which was open GUI. I'm going to do not null because we want to throw an error if that's null, because it should never be null because we assigned it here. And if it is, then we want it to tell us. If we were to do question mark, it would just mean that it wouldn't do anything and it wouldn't throw any errors. We'd never know why the command wasn't working. So we're going to do 2 exclamation marks to say that this will not be null, and if it is, throw an error. So let's do dot set executor, and then we want to pass in our open GUI command like that, and then let's just do a logger.info registered commands, and then we have to call our register commands function up here. Okay, so now let's build and test our plugin. So let's first see if our plugin is here. So we do /pl, and yep, there it is. So let's try our command /open GUI, and look at that, we have our GUI open, and it is called GUI. So this has worked, and you'll notice that you can just hit escape to close it. But you'll notice if I just grab some random stuff here, and I use this open GUI command, I can actually use this as an inventory. I can put items in, I can take items out, and if I close it, the items will just disappear because we're creating a new instance of our GUI every time. So we don't want that, obviously, for a menu that behaves like an inventory. So the next step is to fill our inventory with items, and then we will stop players from putting in items and taking out items. Okay, so back to our plugin now. We're going to go back to our open GUI command, and let's for this add 2 buttons. Let's add one that gives you a full set of diamond armor, and one that closes the GUI without doing anything. To do this, we're going to have to put items in our inventory. And if we go to our inventory here with this nice variable we've made, we can do inventory, and you can add the item like this, but the problem with this one is that you can't set where the item is, so it's not really useful for a GUI. We're going to actually use set item, because as you can see here, it takes an index, and it's very important to remember that indexes start at 0. The first slot on the GUI is index 0. So technically, our GUI that has 9 spaces goes from 0 to 8. There is no 9th slot. That would require a 10 sized GUI, and that doesn't exist because it's not a multiple of 9. But we actually have to have an item to create, but we don't need to do anything fancy. We could just create an item right there, but we probably want to name the item and give it some kind of description. So we're going to have to create our items and then use item meta. So we'll do val, and we'll say, let's make our diamond armor button first. So, all right, let's just say equip armor button. And then we can say equals item stack, and then we'll pass in a material, and let's make it a diamond chestplate, because that sounds like it would equip armor. Diamond chest plate. Okay, so we have our equip armor button. So now we're going to do val equip armor button meta. Oops, meta, because we want to access information about the item. And then we'll just do equip armor button dot item meta for the equals. And by the way, the difference between a val and a var is a var can be changed after you set it. If I set var number, and we set that equal to 1, and then down here we want to do number plus plus. You can do that because this is a var, but if we were to change this to a val, you'd see it throw an error because a val can only be changed once, and that is when you create it. Now, it can be a bit confusing because as you'll see, we're going to do equip button armor button meta dot display name dot display name. Here it is, and we can just pass a component here. But now you might say, okay, well, there's a val, we've assigned it as a val, but yet you're changing it here. And this is a little bit confusing, but we're not actually changing the instance of the object. So up here, we're saying that the this variable equals this equip armor button item meta. It's a instance of item meta that it's getting from here. When we're doing this here, we're accessing functions on that class. We're not actually changing the instance of that class. And that can be a little bit confusing. Okay, so let's name our item. Let's do component. And again, we want to use the right one. Then we're going to say equip armor button. And let's give it a color. Oops, not color. I do text color. Dot color again, and then let's make this why not blue? So we'll do 0 red, maybe 75 green, and 255 blue. And I'm thinking we add a little bit more green because that's quite dark. So let's add maybe 180 green, and that's a bit more of an aqua color or a cyan, and that looks a bit nicer. So that's probably all we want to do for the button. We probably don't want to change any of its lore or anything. You absolutely can with the rest of the things on an item meta. You can set the lore, you can set all kinds of things, but for us, we are just going to set the name. So now we're going to create another item, and we're just going to copy and paste this because this code is going to be very, very similar. We just want to make sure to change our variable names. So let's do close GUI button. And then we'll do close GUI button meta. GUI button meta. And this is important. The way we're going to do the GUI in this video means that you cannot have multiple of the same item type in one menu, because our code will think that they mean the same thing because we're going to be checking the item type. Now, if you want to have multiple of the same type of item in one inventory, then what you would need to do is you would need to give it some kind of unique identifier. So for items, probably a custom model data. Even if you're not using that for its intended purpose, it's a great way to identify items and make them unique. But for the purpose of this video, we're just going to be making them different items, and that's how we'll tell the buttons apart. So this one, I'm going to make a barrier because it kind of looks like a close button to me. And then we also want to make sure to change this from equip button meta to close GUI button meta. And then here we're just going to say close. And actually we can remove this button because we don't need that from our button name. That's quite clear that it's already a button. And I've actually forgot to do one thing here. I've forgotten to actually assign the item meta to the, make sure to change your variables here, because I forgot to do that. But I've also forgotten to actually assign the meta to the item. So we're going to do equip item, or up here, equip armor button dot item meta, and we're just going to do equals equip armor button meta. And then same thing down here, we're going to do close GUI button dot item meta equals close GUI button meta. And that should be all for our items. So now we actually have to put our items in the inventory. So we can do inventory dot set item. And I want to put these in the middle. So we're going to do this should be at item slot 3 because 0 is the first, 1 is the second, 2 is the third, and 3 is the fourth. And then we'll pass in our item. And we'll make this the equip armor button. And then we're going to do another one, inventory.set item. Then we're going to leave a space, so we'll do 5 as the next index. And then we'll do close GUI button. And that should add the buttons to our inventory, so let's test that. Okay, now we're back on our server. We can try our command again, /OpenGUI. And there are our items. And they have our proper item meta. So this one says close, and this one says equip armor. For the armor, you have the equipment stats. I'm not quite sure how to remove that. If anybody knows how to remove that, please let me know in the comments. But you can see that we have our buttons. Now we might want to change this close button to red. So I'm just going to pop back to our code really quick and change this close button to red. So 255 0 0. But you see the other problem is again, we can take these out of our thing, and now that's just a diamond chest plate and a barrier block. And you probably don't want that in your server or in your plugin, because that's not what it's supposed to do. So let's go fix that. So we're back in our plugin now. And in order to not only detect clicks, but also to stop people from removing items from the inventory, we're going to need to do a few things. This part's going to be a little bit more complicated, but it shouldn't be too hard. So here, we're going to create what's called a companion object. And in Kotlin, a companion object basically just means that you can access anything in here without getting an instance of this class. So if I made a function and called it fun hello, right? This is a public function. So it means that anytime I have an instance of this GUI plugin class, I can call the function hello. So if I were to come over here and I were to do GUI plugin and then like this to create a new instance, I could do dot hello. But you'll notice if I don't create a new instance and I take away these two parentheses, I can't use dot hello. And that is a problem because what if we wanted to use it and we did not have an instance available? So what we're going to do is we can move this hello to our companion object. And now you'll see that if we go over here and we try and do hello, it's there. So basically, if you've used any other programming language, this is like making something static. It's quite similar. Okay, so now we can delete this because this is just for demonstration. We're going to create a public, and this is going to be a little bit weird, but I'll explain what it is in a second. Public val inventories, or actually let's do GUI map. And then we're going to define this as a mutable map of UUIDs and inventories. I'm going to set that equal to mutable map of, sorry. And this doesn't actually have to be public because that's the default. So basically what a mutable map is a list of key value pairs. And what that means is that when you put something into this map, it has two values. It has a UUID right here, and that's the key, and it has the value, which is the inventory. So that means that anytime we have this UUID, we can look in this map for the value that corresponds to it. Imagine it like a street address. You have a whole bunch of houses on a street, and the houses are, let's just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You don't want to have to say, okay, I want to go to house 5. You don't want to have to go through all the houses. You don't have to go through everything on the street and go to house 1 and say, is this house 5? No. Go to the next one. Is this 2? Is this house 5? No. Go to the next one. Is this the right house? So on and so forth until you get to 5. You just want to know directly to go to that 5th house. So that's what a map allows us to do. It means you can go to the street and you can say, okay, I want house at the address 5, and then you'll just right away go to 5 and get that house, rather than having to go to the house with the address 1 and saying, is this the right house? Well, no, it's not. So, and then looping through is what we have to do if we're using a list or an array. So that's what this mutable map is, and mutable just means it can be changed. Okay, so now we're going to add our inventory when we open it to the GUI map. And you'll see why we need this in a minute, but for down here, we're going to do GUI map. Oops. We want to do GUI plugin. And because we use that companion object, we can just access GUI map. And then we're going to put square brackets, and this means at. So we're going to put in the key. So the key is our sender.uuid. So this is like the street address. I'm going to say equals. I think this is actually unique ID now. Yeah. I'm going to say equals. And we want to set equal to that inventory. So what we've done is we've set at, remember, at this street address contains this instance up here of inventory. So now we're going to have to create some listeners. So let's create a listeners package. New package listeners. And we're going to need a few. We're going to need, first of all, a inventory close listener. So inventory, inventory close listener. Okay, and then we're going to do inherit from listener, and we're going to implement listener, and we want to make sure to do the org.bucket one. Do add event handler, and we want to do fun inventory close this or event. And then we want to do event, and then that should be type of inventory close event. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is get a reference to, we could get a reference to the player, but because we're only going to be using the player's UUID, we're just going to get a reference to that. So do val player UUID, UUID equals event dot player dot UUID, or unique ID, sorry. Here it is. Okay, and now we're just going to check if GUI plugin dot GUI map dot contains key player UUID. So we're saying if that map contains this key, then we want to do GUI plugin. Now I'm putting this if statement on one line because if you have an if statement that has only one line of code inside it, you don't have to put curly braces, and you can all just write on one line and it looks a bit cleaner. So we're going to do GUI plugin dot GUI map dot remove, and then we're going to pass in the key. So again, player UUID. So basically what we're saying is when a player closes an inventory, we're going to check if that player has an inventory in our GUI map, right? We're going to go to that address and we're going to say, do they have an inventory in this map? And if they do, we're going to remove it because they've just closed it. And if they don't, then we're not going to do anything. So let's register that listener. And the reason we're doing that is just because we want to make sure that we don't have a whole bunch of old useless GUIs in our map. And also we want to make sure that we don't have multiple inventories under the same key. So what we're going to do is private fun register listeners bucket.get server.get plugin manager plugin manager.register events. And remember, you want to use events plural, and then we're going to pass in our listener. So inventory close listener. Inventory close listener. And we also want to pass in this, our plugin. And then we can just do a logger.info, and then we can just say registered listeners. And we want to remember to call this function, register listeners. Now that's great, but this isn't actually going to do anything yet. It's just setting up for what we need to do. So now we're going to create another listener. I'm going to say new calling class file, and we're going to call this player click or actually let's just call it inventory click listener. And this one's going to detect for clicks on the inventory. Now this will detect clicks on any inventory, and that's why we needed that GUI map so we know if it's the correct inventory. So we're going to extend listener, or implement listener, excuse me. Oops, that's the wrong one. Org.bucket one. We'll do add event handler, and then we do fun inventory click event, and then use the event by the same name, inventory. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is get a reference to that UUID again. So we'll do player UUID, I'll do event.whoClicked, because this is just going to be the player who clicked. Now that's a bit weird naming, but it's just the way it is. And then we're going to do .unique ID, just like that. Now we're going to check if that player, or if the inventory that was just clicked matches the inventory in the GUI map. We're going to do if the event dot inventory equals player, or excuse me, equals GUI plugin dot GUI map at the player dot unique or no, because we already have the UID. So if it equals that, then we want to do the rest of our code. So the first thing we want to do is event.isCancelled equals true, because we don't want anybody to put anything in it or take anything out of it. And that would require clicking. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say, well, actually, we'll leave this event.cancelled at the bottom. And this is something new. We're going to create a when statement. Now, this is like a switch statement in any other programming language. We're going to do when, and we're going to pass in our condition, so event.currentItem. And then we're just going to say, in here, we're going to do material dot, and the first one was a diamond chest plate. I'm going to do a little arrow and open curly brackets. We want to make sure that we're using the item's material, so we want to do item.type, and this should return a material. Now this is going to be a problem because it's possible that this is just null. So we're just going to say here, if event.inventory.currentItem current, or sorry, just event.currentItem equals null, then we're just going to return and not do any of the following code, because none of this will be useful. Okay, so now that we've verified that that's not null, we can just add two exclamation marks, because we set up here that it is not null. So now we can do diamond chest plate, and then we can do also our other things, so material dot barrier, same thing with the little arrow. And this is just, so my theme makes this look like its own special character, but this is actually just a dash and a greater than or less than sign, obviously without the space in the middle. Okay, now it's going to get an error here because there are many other things that this could possibly be. So what we're going to do is add an else branch and just put that into nothing, because this is just going to say anything that isn't these two things, execute this code. But we only care about these two things. So if we do a diamond chest plate, we want to equip the player with full diamond armor. So first of all, let's do, and we are going to need a reference to the player as well, because we're going to need to access their inventory. So we'll do player equals event dot who clicked. There we go. Then we can do player dot inventory, or I think you can just do player dot inventory dot helmet equals item stack, then material dot diamond helmet. We'll do player dot inventory dot chest plate equals item stack, material dot diamond chest plate. And as you probably guessed, we'll do player dot inventory dot leggings equals item stack, material dot diamond leggings. And finally, we'll do player dot inventory dot boots equals item stack, material dot diamond boots. Okay, so we've now equipped our player with all the stuff, and we can just close the inventory. So we can do event dot inventory dot close, or not dot clear, dot close. Okay, so now our barrier, and this one's going to be very, very simple. We can just do event dot inventory dot close, just like that. And that should be everything we need for our GUI. So let's test it out. But before we do that, we have to register our listener, because if we don't do that, our listener will not work. So we do the inventory click. Oops. Inventory click listener. There we are. Now we can build this and try it out. Okay, and here we are on the server. So let's do /open GUI. And the first thing, let's try and actually let's grab a block, and then let's try and put a block in. And if we put this block in, you see, we can no longer put the block in, even if we click. Now you'll see, here is a problem, you won't be able to move anything around in your inventory while this is open. And we might fix that in this video, or we might not. I'm not sure yet. It's getting kind of long, so I might leave that for another video. Anyway, let's try our button. So first let's try our close button, and that works super well. Very simple, just close. So as you see, I'm not wearing any armor, but if I use our /open GUI command, oops, /open GUI, and I click our equip armor button, you see it closes our inventory. And if we look in our inventory, if we look in our actual inventory, we have full diamond armor, and we're equipped with full diamond armor. So that's pretty cool. And that is how you create simple GUIs with Minecraft and Minecraft plugins. Now this was a pretty long video because there's a lot to cover here, but none of it's particularly complex. If you'd like to see a part 2 where we go into a bit more depth, maybe creating some custom icons and some a bit more complex GUI logic, like maybe we could create some paginated menus, or we could create sub menus, or we could create like some kind of graphs or something like that. Just let me know in the comments below, because that could be pretty interesting. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.